Well, hello. I didn't get to do any videos last week. I was recovering from many different things, traveling around and doing all sorts of stuff. And having long COVID, that means sometimes I just have to focus on the thing that is most important, which is tutoring. So I spent a lot of time tutoring last week and not doing much else because that's the way that the money comes in. So I thought I would take a look at the local election results a little bit. Um, and One of the things that I wanted to do was to see where general polling in the UK is now after those local election results. Obviously, as you probably will have seen in the news if you've been paying attention at all, that Reform did incredibly well. They did. They did do well. There's no real doubting of that. They picked up over 600 councillors, and the Conservatives lost a similar amount, which might tell a story of its own, really. It might be that an awful lot of the Conservative losses were Reform gains. Labour lost a bit, but uh, these council elections weren't in places where we would expect Labour to do well generally. Some of the areas include big cities and towns, but most of the councils were the shire counties of England, and so you would expect Tories to do particularly well, and they did 4 years ago. So you would have also imagined that they would drop a little bit this time, but the seismic change on the right of politics right now is fascinating, and it is Reform versus the Conservatives. However, Labour are also kind of heading in a Reform sort of direction, aren't they? We've seen them trying to respond to Reform by being tougher on immigration is this week's attempt to do it, and the rhetoric is trying to ward off Reform. They didn't need to do that, I don't think, when they first came into power, but they chose to do it. They chose to look rightwards when they came into power, and they've got a massive majority. They could actually restyle the country in the image that they want the country to look at with that majority, like Thatcher did, particularly from '83 onwards, and like Blair did in 1997. And instead, they've been looking elsewhere and taking a very cautious approach to doing things, to the point that people wonder whether it's actually the Labour Party anymore. And I think that was a mistake. And now they're in the position where Reform are doing so well, as you can see from this chart, which is an amalgamation of the polls since the last general election. You'll see now they can't avoid thinking about Reform. They have put themselves in this position. Reform have basically done well against the Conservatives on the whole. There will be some votes going from Labour to Reform, and certainly in the future that's what Reform want to do. But really, it's the Conservatives that have been losing out to Reform, and now Labour have got to face the reality that they could as well, and Labour could have been much more strategic about this and thought this is a split on the right of politics, and we're going to take a more leftist turn. We're going to shape the country the way we want to. We'll get some benefits from that in terms of the economy working better, public services working properly. That's the big one, isn't it? Public services. Nothing works in this country is the sort of thing that people are saying. Get things working, it could make a huge difference to the poll numbers. Instead, they have focused on chasing after those Reform votes, and now they're going to have to. You can see that Reform are riding high in the polls after the local elections. Whether they're going to stay there or not, it's insanely difficult with our first past the post system to break into that two-party system. Right now, it looks like Reform are doing it, and the local elections show that they're doing it. But it takes time, and things change over time. Think, too, 1983, the 1983 general election, the left was split. Labour was competing not just with the Conservatives, but with the SDP Liberal Alliance, which got 25% of the vote in that 1983 election. Labour sunk to 27% of the vote, and Margaret Thatcher, actually, the Conservatives dropped in the 1983 election. I go on about this election a lot because I think it's so important. The 1983 election was fascinating. Margaret Thatcher's vote dropped, massive landslide though. And so she was able to suddenly transform the country in the direction that she wanted. We are seeing a potentially similar scenario here where Reform are in the position that the SDP Liberal Alliance were in 1983, or in the mid-80s generally, and they're trying to break in. The SDP Liberal Alliance did not break into the two-party system. They did not achieve either becoming one of those two parties or influencing politics enough to create proportional representation, which they were hoping would keep them in power forever, or at least give them a better chance of getting into power. If Reform do not replace the Conservatives at the next general election, I would suggest that it's going to be incredibly difficult for them ever to. Just doing well at last year's general election and doing well in this year's local elections is a positive start, but then we have to look forward to the next possibilities that they have. And it's a year away, really, unless there's a by-election. Obviously, they won in Runcorn and Helsby, which is perhaps more significant than the local elections because you obviously get an actual voice in Parliament. And next year's local elections also involve devolution elections as well. And Reform are doing well in Wales, and they will be hoping that they could perhaps even take control of the Welsh Parliament. That would be then I think we can definitely say they are shaking things up. But I'm going to reserve judgment until then. It could all come crashing down. It is worth noting that when you look at the number of councillors across the country, Reform still have a small number of councillors compared to many other parties. I think including the Green Party have more overall, because not every council holds their elections the same time. So there will be further elections next year, and then we will see a pattern developing, perhaps. We'll have to see. What I did was I worked out the figures of the very latest poll, the very end of these lines, and I did a comparison with 2024 on the electoral calculus website. You can see just how things have changed. The Liberal Democrats have gone up a little bit. Reform have gone up a great deal. The Greens are up a little bit, and obviously Labour and the Tories have dropped significantly. The electoral calculus website allows you to put these figures into their algorithm and click a button, and it predicts how many seats each party would get at the general election. Some caveats. If it was a general election, would people vote the way the polls are suggesting? Are these polls accurate? I'm not convinced, because each of the polling companies are coming up with different figures. Some are putting Reform kind of almost 10 points ahead. Some are putting it more like a tie, or Reform on 1 point ahead. This chart gives us the averages of those latest polls, with the most recent ones having a slight statistical advantage. So some of the more recent polls, if they are outlandish, they make Reform look even better than they are, perhaps. Also, polling anyway isn't necessarily reliable. Why am I even doing this when there's 4 years to go before a general election? I'm doing it because I think it's fun and it's interesting to see where we're at. And I can bet that there are people in every single party looking at these figures and thinking, right, what do we do? What do we do about this? Does this matter? So that's one caveat. Also, the next caveat is that electoral calculus might be totally wrong on how on their algorithm. Clicking a button and trying to predict from these figures who's going to win every single seat in Parliament, tricky. My mind goes back to last year's general election coverage. At 10 o'clock the exit poll was produced, and the BBC, Sky and others were all predicting Reform getting 15 seats. Over the course of the night it turned out quite different. They ended up with 5. So there has to be some issues here. It's not straightforward predicting a general election from these statistics. But let's take a look at what it says. Reform short by 4 of a majority. You need 326 to have a majority in Parliament, in the House of Commons. And you've got various columns here. You've got the 2024 votes, and then the 2024 seats, and then the predicted votes that I've put in terms of percentages, and then gains, losses, the net change, that's the gains offset against the losses, and the number of predicted seats. Well, first of all, let's go to the Conservatives. 39 predicted seats. That is astonishing. Going down from 121, remember, last time round. So, I mean, if there was a general election this week and this happened, we're talking already about one of the most astonishing elections we'll have ever witnessed in this country. Just on this basis, the almighty Conservative Party that win election after election, down to 39 seats. Labour down from 412 to 162, losing 250 MPs. Can we just say, will Keir Starmer still be Prime Minister if something like that happened? Will he still be leader of the Labour Party? He's definitely not going to be Prime Minister on these figures, which I'll come to in a moment. The Liberal Democrats actually losing some seats, down 11 to 61, but in 2024 they got the biggest total for a third party ever. So losing ground isn't a total surprise. I actually think if it came to a real general election, I think they've got a chance of picking up some seats from the Conservatives still, and solidifying a little kind of heartland for themselves in the West Country. But we will see. And then Reform, the big winners, 5 seats last time round on 14.7% of the vote, up to 28.5 on the current figures, gives them a change of 317 seats, bringing them to a brand new total of 322, 4 short of a majority. What would happen? What would happen? Is a good question. Nigel Farage, I think, would be in Downing Street. Either going it alone, or trying to do a coalition with the Tories. I think going it alone. Let's not forget that there would be potentially, if it was the same as last time, there would be around about 7 Sinn Féin MPs who do not turn up and take their seats. So that brings the figure needed for a majority down. And so this would probably see them over the line, I think. And so we're looking at the potential of a Reform government on these figures. So I keep wrestling with the idea of has our politics fundamentally changed? Have we seen the end of multi-party politics? And my instinct always goes back to the fact that first past the post produces a two-party system, and it's very hard for a party to come along and break that. Labour became the second party in that two-party system about 100 years ago, and there hasn't really been a challenge since then, apart from we can look at that mid-80s surge by the SDP Liberal Alliance, but other than that there's never been a moment like this. So it makes me want to say it's unlikely. But maybe what we're seeing is some kind of recalibration. Maybe a two-party system emerges from this. Maybe it's Labour and Reform now. in the future. Maybe the Conservatives are going to drop further. I just don't know. And that uncertainty is fascinating. It will make things unpredictable. There'll be lots of people who say they can predict, and it's almost impossible to predict. But what I think is going to be interesting about this time, the next few years, very frustrating for people just about to face their exams, although they can talk about multi-party politics changing and the local elections providing evidence of that. What we're going to see is this story develop. So anybody halfway through their A-level in government and politics, or people that are just about to start perhaps next, in the autumn, people are going to be able to follow this changing landscape and see where it goes. I still think it's going to be a rocky road for reform, because they find it very difficult to answer questions with any detail. And in a way, their job is incredibly straightforward at the moment. They have got the media attention on them all the time, and all they're doing is criticizing with quite basic, simplistic messages. It seems to be much harder for the Conservatives to get coverage of what their views are, even though they get PMQs each week to ask the government things. It seems harder for Kemi Badenoch to get the kind of coverage that Reform are getting. In that way, Nigel Farage is right that Reform are the kind of main opposition now. In the media they are, in Parliament they're not. Ultimately, Parliament matters a great deal, of course, but so does the media. It sets the scene. But it's going to be hard for Reform, because when there's a possibility of them getting into power nationally, people are going to be talking about their record in local government. They've got a mayor. They might have more than one mayor, actually. I know they've got the mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. I need to check on the others. And they now control several councils, and they will be judged on their record. And if they can't run things at a local level, it will be hard for them to run things at a national level. They can't do what Richard Tice was doing yesterday on Sky News, which is just basically sloganeering with no detail. Absolutely appalling interviews. They can be cut up and put onto TikTok and be quite effective for people, because it's just him saying how terrible things are and how they would do things better. But there's no detail at all. No detail. And as they grow, they are going to get people involved with their party who will want to have a say. And they might not enjoy that process when other ideas come to the fore that they don't want to do. It's going to be interesting to see how all of that developed. I heard some anecdotal evidence, some people at the local elections last week voting for Reform and being horrified to find that their candidates, when they went to vote, were former Tory councillors. They thought they were replacing the Tories. They didn't realise that a lot of them were Tories. Again, that is going to be interesting, how that party develops its own style, and whether it is just a replacement for the Tories, whether it's different from the Tories, whether it's just further right from the Tories. All of that remains untested. So there we go. We'll see how it all pans out. We're not going to have a general election, I don't think, until 2028 at the earliest, maybe 2029. And Labour have the power to change the country radically between now and then. I wonder why they don't take it. Bye-bye for now.